Welcome to the next episode of Tech and the Law podcast. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. Today we're talking about the California bar exam. So since I posted that I recently passed the California bar exam, I had a lot of people asking how I did it and what resources I used. And these are valid questions. As coming from Canada, I was shocked by the size and scope of the bar prep industry in the US. And to be honest, it was overwhelming at the start, and I probably spent at least a month just figuring out how to study, what materials to spend my money on, because I think you could spend a small fortune if you really wanted to. And you don't need to. I don't think so, anyways. So with that out of the way, let's get into it and break it down. So this is how I, as a practicing lawyer in Canada with a full-time job, family, kids, all that, studied for and passed the February 2024 California bar exam. So first I want to talk a little bit about the structure of the exam, because this is something I didn't know about. So the California bar exam is split over 2 days. The first day is 6 essays. 5 of these essays come from the topics of business administrations, civil procedure, community property, constitutional law, contracts, criminal law and procedure, evidence, professional responsibility, real property, remedies towards trusts, and wills. So quite a few different topics that it could come from. 1 hour is allocated to each of these 5 essays. The 6th essay is a practical test based on a closed ecosystem of case law and case materials. And there's 90 minutes allocated for this 6th essay. So essentially 6 essays day 1. Second day is made up of 2 3-hour sessions called the MBE, or the multi-state bar exam. In each session, there are 100 multiple choice questions, and they're based on the following subjects: civil procedure, constitutional law, contracts, criminal law and procedure, evidence, real property, and torts. So day 1, 6 essays. Day 2, 200 multiple choice questions. And if we look back at the structure of the exam and what topics are being tested on what days, we know that some of the MBE, or multiple choice question subjects, will appear in both multiple choice and the essay questions. So in my mind, that meant I should focus on the MBE subjects, as some of them will do double duty and repeat both days of the exam. 2 birds, 1 stone. So let's look a little bit on how I studied for these MBE multiple choice questions. So when I started studying for the MBE, I started with some materials from a big box exam prep company that a friend of mine had lent to me. But what I found is I was just spending hours and hours passively reading, highlighting without retaining anything. When I would try and look at those materials and create my own notes from them, it was just taking too long without any real value. I wasn't retaining anything. I didn't think I was really learning anything. So for my learning style, that wasn't working. So to change that, I invested in the Steve Emanuel Strategies and Tactics for the MBE 8th edition book. I just got that off Amazon. And Brian Hahn, Hahn, Make This Your Last Time. He has some really good condensed study notes and materials. Just Google his name, find it online, very inexpensive. So those are my 2 primary resources I used when studying for the MBE. I later added Adaptibar to the mix, and Adaptibar is just an online bank of MBE questions with really well thought out reasoning as to why one answer is right or why one answer is wrong. And so when I was studying for the MBE, I would take about an hour tops to read Hahn's notes or some of the study materials out of the Steve Emanuel book, but an hour tops to read and to quote unquote study the material in a traditional sense. I would cap it at an hour, and then I would move to do as many multiple choice questions as I could in that day. So usually I would do about 2 hours worth of multiple choice questions. So study an hour, 2 hours of multiple choice questions. And I think the key was in doing these multiple choice questions, I really focused on the narrative in both the Emanuel book and in Adaptibar as to why I got a question right or wrong. So for each question, A, B, C, D answers, and then these resources go into a lot of detail on why A is right or why A is wrong, and so forth for all the other questions. And that's really how I studied. I would do a question and I would study the narrative in detail until I had a good understanding of why I got that question right or wrong. So some days in the 2 hours I spent doing questions, I would do very few questions because it was taking me a long time to understand the narrative. And some days, and certainly closer to the exam, I was doing 40, 50, 60 questions at a time because I was understanding quicker why a question was right or wrong. I didn't need to spend quite as much time on the narrative. The other advantage, I think, to studying this way is there's only so many ways you can ask a question. There's only so many things that people want to test on, certainly for the main ideas. And so by doing as many multiple choice questions as you can, you get a sense of patterns, topics, commonly tested issues, and also the timing. And all of those kind of become second nature, right? You learn how a question is going to be structured. You learn what type of issues they want to talk about. And the speed in answering the questions just came naturally as well, the more I did. So that's how I picked up most of my legal rules. Legal principles in studying for the exam was by doing these multiple choice questions. Also, towards the end, so maybe 2 months out from the exam, I would also start to write out rule statements based on some of the narratives, just so I had a rule statement in my own words. I found that easier to remember. And then again, just through repetition of doing these questions, thinking of my rule statements, then it would naturally kind of become memorized. So I think in total, because people always ask, I did about 2,500 multiple choice questions. Again, though, the goal wasn't quantity of questions. The goal was quality and making sure I understood the reasoning behind why something was right or wrong. The next thing I want to say about multiple choices is something like the rule of perpetuities. Maybe it's going to come up as one multiple choice question. I didn't even bother studying it. I knew I could spend a week on it, and at most I gained 1 point. In my mind, it made a lot more sense studying, something like negligence, where I know there's going to be a lot of questions on the exam, or at least a higher probability of it. And so let's study where I can make up more points. Next, how I studied for the essay questions. So once I had a good grasp of the MBE subjects, and I want to stress good, not great. I certainly had a lot of gaps. But once I had a good understanding of the MBE subjects, I switched to also adding the essays into the mix and studying those as well. And for these, I primarily used Brian Hand's notes, Make This Your Last Time, and also the essay exam bank on the California Bar Exam website. So if you go to their website, they have, I don't know exactly how many, let's say 15 years of past exams, and they have all the essays asked with sample answers, and 2 sample answers for each essay. So you want to know what a good essay looks like, what they're looking for, free resource right there on the California Bar Exam website. And I spent a lot of time looking at those, really, really insightful and cost effective. So when I was studying the essays, I know some people say write out the exam essays in full every time. From a timing perspective, with family and work, I didn't think I had the time to spend an hour and a half just to write out one essay. So what I would do is I would, pull up an essay off the California Bar Exam website. I'd read the essay once as a story. I would see what the call of the question was. What are they looking for? I'd read it again, looking for information and facts in the materials that would help me answer that. And then I would just write out my answer in point form. So using IVAC, here's the issue, point form. Here's the rule, point form. A bit of analysis, point form, and then a conclusion, point form. And by doing it in point form and in jot notes, I could get through a lot of essay questions relatively quickly. And so instead of spending 90 minutes on one question, I could probably do one question every 30 minutes, including reading, answering in my point form method I just talked about, and then looking at the answers, the sample answers, in a lot of detail, and where needed, copying up those rule statements, and just working on memorizing those and thinking about those. In my mind, I knew I could write okay. I knew I could follow IRAC. What I wasn't as comfortable in is, can I issue spot, especially in areas that were unfamiliar to me, civil procedure in the U.S., constitutional law in the U.S. Can I identify the issues in those, and can I identify the rule statements? So my goal in studying essays was to see as many as I could, so I could work on issue spotting and writing our rule statements. And again, just through repetition of doing so many essay questions and point form rule statements, that's how I memorized the rule statements. I never sat down and said, okay, I need to memorize this rule statement. I memorized through application. That worked for me, may not work for you, but that's how I'm used to working in my professional life. So it made sense that that's how I would also study. And performance test. So we talked about that closed ecosystem where you get a fact pattern, case law, maybe some legislation, some questioning transcripts, discovery transcripts, and you have to do a memo to a partner or some type of document that's going into the court. Again, I didn't write it one out in full. I would just do point form, boom, 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 issue, rule, analysis, conclusion. And I would just do it that way because as I said, I didn't have time to do the full thing. So in addition to the resources I talked about, some of the studying tactics I talked about, I did listen to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Just Google that as well, Spotify, Apple. I listened to that when I was driving or running to hear some of the topics explained in a different way, and to hear some strategies and different ideas on how to approach the bar exam. They're great podcasts. I don't think I retained a lot of, let's say, black letter law from them, but it certainly helped in how I went about crafting my responses and thinking about how to answer questions. And I think some of the reason I didn't retain the black letter law from those podcasts wasn't because the podcasts weren't good, is because I was doing it as something secondary. I wouldn't count that as studying time. I would listen to it while I was running or doing chores around the house, whatever it may be. And the goal was just to try and pick up a few tidbits on how maybe to approach things. And so I think it was really effective for that. So other than that, just a lot of time in the saddle, so to speak. I don't think there's much of a magic bullet or the magic resource. I think I spent the first month looking and trying to figure out what materials worked for me, what worked for my study habits. And then once I figured that out, I just kind of stuck to that and was confident in what I chose, that would work for me. And then I my goal was 3 hours a day for about 6 months. And that's more or less how I studied. It worked out in the end. Everyone's going to be a little bit different. If you went to school in the US, you probably don't need quite that much time, but I'd rather over prepare than under prepare. But hopefully that gives you some ideas on how to study for the exam, especially if you're coming from overseas to take it, like myself in Canada, or you have a really busy life with work, family, kids, like myself. So everyone studies differently. I think the big thing is to find out what works for you, make a plan, stick to it, and don't go chasing, the great resource that someone mentions, or what you think is a silver bullet resource that you hear about on YouTube. Because I think you could spend easily 3 hours a day for 6 months just listening to different people talk about how to prepare for the exam and what's the absolute one resource that you need to spend your money on. Again, I did it with Adaptabar, Brian Hahn's notes, and Emmanuel, which is kind of the classic MBE study book off Amazon. So very cost effective, but high quality resources. And then just think of your plan and stick with it. So hope that helps. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to give any insight I can, because certainly people helped me on my journey. And my goal here is just to try and give back to the community, and wish everyone good luck and happy studying and enjoy the process. Not many people are in this position where they get to try and do this exam, and it's exciting. When you're in the room writing with 1,000, 1,800 people, there's an energy there. Enjoy the energy, enjoy the moment, and best of luck. All right. We'll see you next time. Thanks.